Welcome to today's business webinar of the Franco-Nigerian Chamber of Commerce and Industry in partnership with Kpmg and sponsored by Sholep Energy Limited. My name is Umori Moses. I'm the Director General of the Franco-Nigerian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Bonjour à tous et bienvenue au webinaire de la Chambre de commerce et d'industrie Franco-Nigérian en partenariat avec Kpmg et Sholep. So thank you for joining us this morning, and we hope you are keeping very, very safe. On behalf of the Consul General de France à Lagos, which is the Consul General of France in Lagos, Madame Laurent Momichon, the Chairman Board of Directors of the Franco-Nigerian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Eric Janu, and the board members of the Franco-Nigerian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, we want to welcome you to this very, very special business webinar series. We'll be talking about reimagining the tax and finance function of your organization post-pandemic. We have, of course, a lineup of professionals that will be dishing out relevant information to us today. We organize this event in commitment with the Chamber's mandate to keep doling out information, relevant information to our members, to keep you informed, to keep you abreast on relevant issues that affect your business. And of course, ensuring that you're making the right decisions as far as investments, as far as efficiency in the business operations is concerned. And we're delighted to particularly welcome you to today's event. Let me thank our partners, Kpmg, of course, always being with us for supporting today's event. And of course, our sponsor, Sholep Energy Limited. Sholep Energy Limited has been in the business of renewable energies for over 13 years, and they have been providing great service. One thing I want to mention about Sholep is that Sholep has also contributed towards to Lagos State. They contributed some solar energy materials to one of the Lagos State isolation centers in the fight of the COVID-19. So we thank you very much, Sholep Energy, for doing this for us. So once again, we welcome you to today's event, and I'll be handing over to our moderator, which is Mr. Mohammed Adama, Partner, Consumer Markets and Audits over at Kpmg. Mr. Mohammed, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Moses. Good morning and welcome to this event. My name is Mohammed Adama. I'm a partner at Kpmg Professional Services. Let me quickly run us through the agenda for this event. We're going to start off by an opening from Joseph Tegbe, who is the partner and head of technology and markets at Kpmg Advisory Services, a very brief opening. And thereafter, we'll be taking our keynote presentation on the topic, Reimagining Your Organization's Strategic Imperative, by Ijeoma Emeze Ezigbo, who is a partner, Deal Advisory, Kpmg Advisory Services. Ijeoma's presentation will take about 15 to 20 minutes. And after that, we'll have the panel session, and we'll have a powerful panel, and they'll be sharing their thoughts and experience on leveraging technology to enhance the finance and tax function. And that will take about 40 to 50 minutes. We'll thereafter have Q&A because we expect to have questions from the participants. And Moses will come back again to handle the Q&A. So we are hoping to wrap up at about 12:45. The Q&A session should take about 20 to 25 minutes. Thank you very much. So let me now invite Joseph Tegbe, who is a partner and head technology and markets, Kpmg Advisory Services, to give his opening address. Joseph.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. Let me start by saying a big thank you to everyone for being here with us today. We're very pleased to be able to welcome you to this FNCCI webinar. Before we get started, I would like to thank FNCCI in partnership with Kpmg for bringing this special platform for networking, although virtually, to exchange ideas and share insights and best practices, and also identify priorities for finance and tax functions across industries, particularly in the post-COVID-19 era. In today's event, just like Mohammed said, we'll focus on exchanging ideas in reimagining finance and tax functions post-pandemic. As we take time first to think about the health of our families, friends, and loved ones, we're already learning lessons that will help us to navigate the urgent trials that we face today in our business, which affect our finance and tax functions. Some of these lessons actually include the fact that business resilience is not just a catchphrase anymore. It's a necessity, and it's having its moment. A rethink of processes and large parts of our business operations is now required. The pandemic has accelerated the need to also transform finance function and our tax functions. Prior to COVID-19 outbreak, many finance and tax functions across a range of organizations and sectors were already undergoing transformation or evaluating their operation models. This was largely in response to broad and well-documented set of challenges and drivers, which included managing costs, delivering value, attracting and retaining talent, and making efficient use of technology. Fast forward to 2020, it is unimaginable how our lives and businesses have changed in the face of COVID-19 pandemic. Businesses have been forced to run operations remotely with a large number of people working from home. They have had to move swiftly to deal with the sudden and pressing challenges, such as those around client payment delays, which have been problematic as cash flows dry up and the global supply chain comes under pressure. Therefore, one of the key tasks for finance and tax professionals as we emerge from this COVID-19 will be to scrutinize manual actions that still require physical and human interactions or manual processing, and to consider digital solutions. The entire ecosystem of automation measures must be considered, including large-scale enterprise resource planning, as well as niche tools to automate very specific processes. Software as a service, SaaS, solutions have become much more attractive now to accommodate the rapid changes in finance and accounting technology development without heavy upfront investment in certain tools. But a good balance of capital investment in core ERP and SaaS solutions will have to be considered, rather than just a long-term investment into fully owned platform, which can become outdated earlier than business cases for capital investment is realized. On another hand, fully digitalized finance and accounting functions brings its own cybersecurity challenges, and we're already seeing that. Network security and stability issues, access rights, data exchange challenges, country regulations, and limitations around data storage and exchanges are rearing their head. The more a complex ecosystem grows post-COVID, the more issues will arise. And when it comes to data integrity and system compatibility, the duplication and reconciliation of data and actions in multiple systems will arise. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, All this presents an array of opportunities and challenges. I'm not going to take much of your time. Neither do I want to start, to take a bite at some of the presentations that have been put together by our professionals who are going to follow on after my presentation. We're already assisting our clients in navigating some of these challenges. So again, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, today will be a fun-filled day full of learning and knowledge sharing. So a very warm welcome to you again. If you have any questions or suggestions or clarifications, please say hi to me in the lobby. Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Thank you very much for that brief opening. Now, I now invite Ijeoma Emeze Ezigbo, Partner Deal Advisory at Kpmg, to share her thoughts on reimagining your organization's strategic imperatives. Ijeoma is a partner and has led various financial and business advisory engagements, covering market entry, buy and sell side M&A advisory across the transaction cycle up to financial close, business planning and feasibility studies, valuation and post-deal value creation support to clients across private equity, FMCG, and TMT. Prior to joining Kpmg, Ijeoma was a lead financial analyst with IBM Canada, where she managed a company's strategic outsourcing contracts to one of Canada's leading banks. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Ijeoma to the virtual podium to share her thoughts with us. Ijeoma, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I would like to stand on existing protocols while appreciating the Franco-Nigerian Chamber of Commerce and Industry for their strong partnership with Kpmg over the years. Thank you, Mohammed, also for the introduction. Today, I'll be making a presentation on how organizations should reimagine their strategic imperatives and investments post-pandemic. I'll begin my presentation by first setting the context on the impact that COVID-19 has had on the economy and consumer behavior in general. Following on from this, I will discuss the strategic imperatives for executives as they navigate the post-pandemic period to ensure that the overall strategies of the organizations align to the new consumer and the new normal. To set the context, we have analyzed the tremendous impacts that COVID-19 has had on the global economies, with the still rising number of infections and worsening macroeconomic environment, especially the recent spike in the United States in recent weeks. Overall, the GDP of African economies has declined by an average of 3%, while accounting for less than 5% of global infections. I would really say that we are quite blessed indeed. And we hope that this will also translate to a quicker recovery across the African economies. Bringing it home to Nigeria, our Nigerian economy is also expected to shrink by about 3% in 2020, even as businesses have been allowed to return to work amid concerns for personal safety. The COVID-19 NLPS is a survey that is being conducted by the National Bureau of Statistics in collaboration with the World Bank. The objective of the survey is to monitor the real-time socio-economic effects of the pandemic. The questionnaire used for the purpose of the survey is also revised on a monthly basis to ensure that the data collected is real-time. The results of the survey underscore the tremendous human and economic impact of the pandemic in Nigeria, with a decline in the percentage of employed respondents, particularly in the urban areas, which were most impacted by the lockdown, from 84% before mid-March to 33% at the peak of the lockdown. With the ease of the restrictions in movement, we are pleased to see significant recovery to 64%, while still optimistic that we'll continue to see an upward trajectory in this trend. In view of the enormous impact of the pandemic, Kpmg undertook a global research on the new consumer, in quotes, with the objective to elicit the factors and trends that will shape consumer needs, expectations, and behavior post-pandemic. We will be happy to share a copy of our report with the Fncci at the end of the webinar for onward distribution to interested participants. Interestingly, our research finds that the new consumer, in quotes, is expected to be financially constrained and more digitally savvy. The research also finds that the changes that we're seeing during this pandemic would likely persist beyond the short term. Most consumers believe that we're living our new normal, in quotes, hence businesses will be faced with new challenges in the new reality. Our research identifies areas that would inform organizations' decisions and plans during and post-pandemic. These three key areas include: the first is that the economic impact of COVID-19 will influence behaviors for some time to come, as almost half of the respondents noted their financial and psychological constraints. Hence, their significant reduction in discretionary spend, in addition to deferring non-essential purchases. The second is that the new consumer is digitally savvy and will continue to embrace the ease with which they can interact with organizations through digital channels. The third is that consumers will increasingly buy from organizations they trust, mindful that trust is becoming more complex and more nuanced. The key dimensions of trust to pay critical attention to include: first, the trust that organizations will put the needs of their consumers first. The second is the trust that the consumer's data will be secure and protected, most especially in view of the increased digital footprint. Lastly, for the younger respondents, there is a greater level of attention on an organization's conduct towards their community, employees, and the environment. Some of the trust highlighted will require significant investments post-pandemic. One key area will be around digital security to ensure that consumer data and information are well protected. Another area to consider will be investment in environmental sustainability. But for us in Nigeria, my view is that these investments in sustainability will only happen in the medium to long term. Following from this background, the question then is, how should organizations reimagine their strategic imperatives and investments post-pandemic? My view is that organizations should evaluate these post-pandemic strategic imperatives through the lens of the 9 levers of value as presented. I will speak to each of the levers in as much detail as possible. The first lever, financial outcomes, focuses on the financial aspirations of an organization. Levers 2 to 4 define an organization's business model and answer the question, where do we play as an organization? On the other hand, levers 5 to 8 summarize the business model, which relate to how organizations intend to play, to execute, and to win in the marketplace. While lastly, lever 9 focuses on how organizations should measure and incentivize performance across key segments, including subsidiaries and associated businesses, to ensure the effective execution of its strategy. In summary, in the post-pandemic period, organizations must reimagine their business and operating model across these 9 levers and be ready to make the necessary investments to strengthen these areas. From a practical perspective, management needs to be able to critically answer the following questions with respect to an organization's financial outcome. First, what is the organization's overall financial ambition, which is informed by its existing strategic priorities and guided by the overarching vision, mission, and values of the organization? Second, how do these translate into short to medium-term revenue and profit targets over the next 5 to 10 years? And third, what are those key metrics that will enable executives track and monitor actual performance? These financial metrics must track those areas of performance that are important for every organization's long-term growth and financial health. These include, first, profitability, which ensures that the organization is not only growing, but is growing profitably. Second, liquidity, to ensure that the organization has enough cash and access to funding to meet its short-term obligations, including working capital financing. The third is solvency and stability, to ensure that not only is the organization liquid in the short term, but also in the long term to guarantee the stability of the business. And lastly, what tools are necessary to ensure that executives have increased visibility and are consistently able to monitor these metrics and KPIs? Some of these tools include real-time market intelligence that ensures decision points are driven by real-time data on developments in the marketplace, including activities of key competitors, which definitely executives need to have visibility around. The second is robust cash and working capital management, which is imperative to ensure overall liquidity and financial health of the organization. Executives must ensure that the working capital and cash management frameworks are integrated within a robust financial model. This integration will enable executives carry out dynamic financial scenarios on various possible financial outcomes to ensure that they are prepared for different scenarios that could arise. These tools will require investment in financial reporting automation to ensure that both the data input process and analytics for decision making are seamless and error-proof. In view of the findings of our research on the new consumer, organizations will need to be able to answer critical questions around their business model post-pandemic to ensure that they're robust and more customer-centric to drive strong value proposition and customer loyalty in view of the financial constraints of the new consumer. I will speak to a few of these areas and questions. With respect to markets, executives need to dimension their industries as well as the competitive landscape to better understand which markets are core to their growth, and for companies with foreign operations, which markets should they exit and which ones should they enter. On propositions and brands, it will be imperative for organizations to reimagine their product portfolio and unique value proposition of their products to drive customer loyalty. Innovation around product and service offering in view of the financial constraints of the new consumer will be key to growth post-pandemic. Lastly, on customers and channels, the research indicates that there is a high need for organizations to reimagine the current channels of communicating with their customers and the delivery of their products and services. Overall, we expect that this will require a shift from the more traditional to a mix of channels that effectively leverage digital strategy for a wider reach and connection. This is one area where we expect to see significant investments post-pandemic. On the other hand, in line with a more digital-oriented business model, technology and operations infrastructure will be a critical aspect to an organization's operating model that would require significant investments post-pandemic, again, in view of the emergence of the digitally savvy consumer. In this regard, executives will have to reimagine their digital investments with greater focus on enhancing digital security, to enhancing customer experience, and lastly, improving employee retention. In the same vein, the uncertainties created by the pandemic have also necessitated that organizations reimagine their enterprise controls framework to ensure robustness. With respect to this, we will be focusing on two critical areas in our panel discussions today, which are finance and tax functions, to ensure that organizations have a holistic visibility across the different aspects of these two very strategic functions. With respect to tax specifically, some global disruptors have emerged in recent times, which have also given rise to the strong need for executives to reimagine their tax function. Organizations need to consider the implication of these factors on their overall tax function. Also, organizations will need to reimagine their finance functions and enhance efficiency starting with the automation of the traditional financial reporting process to integrated technology-enabled value-add activities, such as business partnering and predictive analytics. In addition to these, organizations also need to reimagine their supply chain and establish procedures to ensure that they're not only able to solve the short-term disruptions that we have witnessed with this pandemic, but that they are also able to ensure long-term stability to their supply chains. We have highlighted some key areas of considerations with respect to supply chains. One would be, what plans does the organization have to mitigate against significant shortages of supplies post-pandemic? Another critical question to answer would be, do your critical suppliers have documented business continuity and disaster recovery plans? Are there alternate suppliers being identified and engaged for short-term sourcing if when required? In view of the massive disruption and significantly longer lead times that we are witnessing with respect to importation of raw materials and other inventory, what will be the implication of these long lead times on working capital requirements of the organization? And lastly, how is the organization driving the need to significantly localize supply chains? We recommend that organizations evaluate opportunities to localize supply chains. At the peak of the border closure that led to the disruption of poultry supply chain, quick service restaurants sought to backward integrate to guarantee the supply of chicken, which constitutes more than 60% of their inputs. The pandemic has made the case even more compelling, and we expect to see similar activities among leading FMCG players. We are advising some of our clients currently on different options, either in the form of a brownfield acquisition or a greenfield build and integrate into the existing value chain. The last but not the least area is lever 8, people and culture. Organizations will need to ensure that there is adequate investment in skills and capabilities required post-pandemic to achieve the organization's financial ambition. In addition to employee training and development, executives will need to continue to invest time and resources on employee health and safety, as well as continuous employee engagement. A key area of consideration will be investment in technology infrastructure that will continue to support remote and flexible working arrangements post-pandemic. In conclusion, executives through the period need to continuously evaluate the organization's portfolio and asset mix to maximize value. The strategic objectives should be driven by the organization's assessment of their existing portfolio of assets in line with the evaluation metrics that we have presented. Executives can relate the metrics to how they evaluate their portfolio of products or subsidiaries or major assets on the balance sheet to ensure that they're able to optimize value and also unlock cash from these assets. The poor performers are twofold and in two quadrants of the metrics: the poor dogs and the question marks. The poor dogs are poor performing assets in a low growth market, while the question marks are poor performing assets in a high growth market. On the other hand, the strong performers are also twofold: the cash cows and stars. While the cash cows operate in stable low growth markets, the stars, as their names indicate, are strong performers in a high growth market. I will recommend that executives consider this in their evaluation. First will be to consider divesting from the poor dogs, particularly if they are non-core. Our experience in the market assisting our clients in their evaluation of their strategic options is that an asset that is non-core to one entity could be core and strategic to another entity. Divestment can also enable organizations to release cash required to invest in defending the cash cows and further consolidating the stars. For the purpose of defending, consolidating, and increasing market share, executives could consider different forms of strategic alliances and partnerships, including mergers and acquisitions. If you'd want to consider the critical evaluation of your strategic imperatives as an organization in this post-pandemic period, including specifically any of the areas covered by my presentation, Please know that we are well positioned to support you through the journey. Next, we'll have a deeper discussion on how organizations should reimagine their finance and tax functions post-pandemic during the panel discussion. Thank you everyone for listening. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, IJ. That is very, very insightful. In the key message really is securing the key drivers of value as a major area of focus, for business leaders. And this means really focusing investment or directing investments towards the stars and the cash cows, and then exploring other opportunities with respect to the question marks. So I'll come back to you in a little bit with a question, but let me quickly introduce our panelists for today. The first member of our panel is Nika James. She's a partner, tax regulatory and people service at Kpmg, and she has over 2 decades of experience working to provide tax advisory and compliance services to multinational and local clients in the financial services industry. Her wide range of experience also covers assignments such as tax risk management services, tax advisory and compliance, implementation of cross-border schemes, corporate mergers and acquisitions. She has tremendous experience and she'll be sharing her thoughts with us very shortly. The second member of our panel this morning is Bolanle Afolabi, who is an associate director in accounting advisory services. And Bolanle has over 15 years progressive experience in accounting and finance operations for startups, emerging and multinational companies. She has also been seconded to various clients in the key sectors, FMCG, different sectors, to provide leadership to the finance functions, which has really been instrumental to the transformation of a number of those finance functions of these clients. She has strong leadership and problem-solving skills, so she has hands-on industry experience. Unfortunately, one of our panelists is unable to make it, but not to worry. We have on the panel people with hands-on experience and deep experience as well that will ensure justice is done to the topics of discussion. So welcome Bolanle and Nike to join IJ on the panel. So quickly, I start off with you, Ijoma, for you to share, no, sorry, not Ijoma, Nike, for you to share with us your thoughts on reimagining the tax function, post-pandemic.
Okay, thank you very much, Mohammed, and thank you, Ijoma, for the wonderful presentation. I'd also like to thank the Franco-Nigerian Chamber of Industries for this wonderful opportunity as well. Now, to start my presentation, or rather, it's not a presentation, I think I just want to share a few thoughts, and I'd like to make reference to one of the slides that Ijoma presented to us, where she shared with us some of the global disruptors that's actually creating a need for us to reimagine our tax and finance function. On that slide, there were 5 major disruptors that were shared. So we had the economic, we had social, political, we had regulatory and technological disruptors. I'll be doing a deep dive on just 2 of those disruptors, just to enable us to understand more clearly why these things are important. And as I do that, I'll just quickly share with you my screen and a deep dive that I'll do on those slides. So let's start with the economic disruptors. Now, would all agree with me that the pandemic has generally weakened global economies, and this is as a result of the weakening demand for goods and services by customers. This has in turn led towards a dwindling of revenues of businesses. Now, businesses have suffered a dwindling of revenue, but they all complain that their cost profile has remained unchanged, and in many instances has even gone up. So for instance, for a lot of Nigerian businesses, in the face of the fluctuating exchange rates and devaluation of the naira, the cost levels have gone up. So the question is, in the midst of dwindling revenues, how does the tax function manage its costs? This has led to a reason for us to start reimagining the functions and how the tax function actually operates and delivers value so that they can manage this post-pandemic. And we'll be sharing with you some of the strategies that are being used both globally and also by companies locally in order to address this issue. And the first of it is centralization. It talks about centralizing your tax function in terms of your functions, your processes, your systems, and your people. Now, so particularly for businesses that have several operating outlets that are spread geographically, and let's take, for instance, spread across the country, do we need to have hodgepodge different tax and perhaps accounting functions also spread along all those outlets? The answer is, if you currently have a decentralized system of that nature, this is probably the right time to think about bringing it all together and having a central function in one spot actually serve the entirety of the organization. Another strategy that has been considered, and this is very important, is outsourcing versus insourcing of your tax needs. Now, let me just pause here and remind you that the goals why you outsource, or the goals why you have to reimagine your tax function, is it must deliver on 4 different metrics. One, it must help you to reduce cost, it must help you to increase value, it must improve efficiency, and it must deliver on quality. So if there's any service that you're currently doing in-house that if you outsource will achieve those 4 goals, then you're better off outsourcing, because keeping it in-house is actually a drain on your scarce revenue resources. Now, let me share with you some of the examples we've seen in the marketplace that people are doing in the tax function. I take, for instance, especially for very large organizations that have maybe very detailed payroll functions, a number of them are beginning to say, can we afford to actually do our payroll in-house? Are we not better off outsourcing to a low-cost service provider, a payroll bureau that can still deliver and achieve all those 4 goals, and then we can also save our costs? Another area we've seen is routine tax and accounting functions. So the question is to take a holistic look at organizations and determine what processes, what job functions or tasks can be outsourced to those who can help us deliver on them and still, maintain those quality. Now, the 4th strategy we've also seen is in terms of whether you engage digital labor versus human labor. And I remember at the beginning, an introductory statement by JT, he made a lot of mention about automation. Really, that is really the way to organizations beginning to determine that even for the functions that they keep in-house in the tax function, you ask the question of what can we automate? Can we automate in terms of and get value rather than use human form? And I'll give you one of the simple examples we've seen, particularly for large organizations that have, operating functions maybe all over the country, and they have huge workforce. Most of them often have a dedicated team. There's a dedicated tax team that is like a help desk. All they do is respond to phone calls and emails because there are so many questions that are coming from a large, batch of employees asking questions about taxation. And the question is, do you need to have a team solely dedicated as a help desk? Can you not automate it? Can you not have a bot, for instance? Many of you know of those chat boxes. You go on the internet, you want to have this. They just ask a question. A number of organizations are beginning to have that as their tax help desk, which has now been done by robots. It's not humans that are behind it. So we are using machine language and machine intelligence machine learning to actually deliver on that. So these are a few of the strategies to address the issue of how economic disruptors can be managed and you imagine your tax function. And I'll quickly talk about the other one, which is regulation, which is really the regulatory pressures as a disruptor that is actually also forcing you to reimagine your tax function. It may surprise a number of you to know that most tax authorities worldwide are beginning to digitize, and the Nigerian Tax Authority is not left out of it. We see situations whereby our tax authorities are digitizing their back offices. They're also digitizing the interface with taxpayers. In fact, this year, a number of you who probably submitted TP returns are aware that you could have submitted your TP returns online. It was available. For next year, the plan is CIT returns too. You'll have the capabilities to submit it online. And ultimately, the tax authority wants to automate all its compliance processes and get to a stage whereby they are in a plug and play phase, as we say. What that plug and play phase means that they can on a real-time basis interface with your enterprise resource system and pull out data from it. In fact, let me pause and mention stamp duties. A number of you know that stamp duties is controversial right now. The tax authorities are planning to go to the banks, and especially on electronic transactions, to review their records for the last 5 years. One of the strategies being used is APIs. Tax authorities have written the banks that we're coming to plug in our APIs to pull data from your system and confirm that you have indeed charged stamp duties over all the transactions you should have in the last 5 years. So the question you ask taxpayers, are you going to sit down and let the tax authority interrogate your data without you also using automation and analytical tools to first interrogate that data and then know whether there are issues with it? So based on the evolution of the tax authorities, taxpayers are also being forced to also move in the line of digitization so that it can be compliant with the requirements tax authorities will be bringing on you going forward. Another area because of this digitization is it begs the question of what kind of skills do I need in my tax department? Traditionally, it's all about tax and accounting skills, but we're beginning to see that for the future, you're going to be talking about IT skills, you're going to be talking about data scientists. So the question as I round up on this little introduction is, how ready are we for the future? Now, an evolutionary journey we know that should have taken ordinarily like 10 years, based on the pandemic, is being compressed to perhaps 1, 2, or at best 3 years. So is our tax function ready for the future that is emerging post-pandemic? We as Kpmg, this is the kind of conversation we are very happy to have with you. We'd like to talk to you in terms of what is your transformational journey and support you along the way towards moving your tax function on where you are today to reimagining it in order to position it for a period post-pandemic. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nika. Thank you very much, Nika. That's very, very insightful. And I think the very important point you made there is the fact that the tax authorities themselves are actually adopting digitization, with respect to managing tax and tax compliance. So it's very important that business leaders are also moving in the same direction and getting their businesses ready as well to plug into, the digitization roadmap or objectives of the various tax authorities. This is starting both at the federal and in some states already, like Lagos State. So this is, as a business leader, you cannot even be left behind because there is no option. That is where they are going. Transaction, the increase in the share volume in the number of transactions means the most optimal way of managing these things by the tax authorities themselves is to digitize, and you can't be left behind. You also shared very important tips in terms of managing the cost of compliance as well, which is how do you centralize your tax function? Let's say, and this is important for businesses that operate a group structure. How do you centralize that function? How do you outsource? And the 4 things you said people need to consider when they're thinking about outsourcing and, of course, digitization. Thank you very much for the insightful, very short presentation. And I'm sure people have picked up 1 or 2 things from your thoughts. So I'll come back to you in a while, with a question that I have, and I'm sure participants already who have some questions for both yourself and IJ. But before we come there, let's move to Bolanle very quickly to share her thoughts with us on leveraging technology to enhance the finance function. Bolanle, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Mohammed. I would first of all like to say thank you to the FNCCI for the opportunity, as well as Ijoma for setting the context. I'm speaking on leveraging technology to enhance the finance function. I'll be starting by stating that this is not a new request or a new requirement for the finance function, but from my interactions with a number of finance leaders, the issues we've been having in making significant progress in these areas are around 3 key areas, which is what is really driving the need for technology enhancements in the finance function. A number of finance leaders will typically say they've implemented an ERP that focuses on their accounting and reporting. A number of their processes are already automated through workflows. What exactly is driving the need to enhance the function again with technology? Some other have questions around what technology solutions should finance functions be considering? What are the key considerations? And then finally, we also have a number of questions on how and when to begin, given that the skills and capabilities for technology does not necessarily lie within the finance function. So I will be addressing these key 3 areas in my startup conversation, and we can take questions afterwards. So in terms of the digital enhancements, what is really driving it? There are 4 key areas that will summarize them as. The first one is that the business landscape is changing. Digital disruption has caused a lot of changes in the business landscape, and the business, being a key stakeholder of the finance function, cannot be ahead of technology while finance then begin to lag behind. So for us to be able to service and provide service to the business, we need to find a way to embed digital technologies into our processes so that we can remain relevant in the modern business world. Even for organizations that are not adopting digital, COVID has also made a number of organizations to then accelerate that need. So right now is about the time to act. We can't delay it further. The second reason that is driving the need for technology enhancement in the finance function is the increasing demand for business from stakeholders. In the past, the traditional roles of ensuring that records are kept, management reports are prepared, and statutory compliance are made is not enough. So the CEO, operations team, the market team are demanding more from the finance team. They are looking for the finance team to become business partners and provide more strategic insights to strengthen business decisions. That cannot be done when we are still doing a lot of manual processes. So we need to be able to automate routine finance tasks so that we can free up resources to focus on these strategic insights. The other drivers that is requiring finance to step up on their technology drive is the rising expectation on finance to even improve efficiency. So there are a lot of feedback and comments from surveys and from discussions from leads and stakeholders that even the core finance operations around preparing the books, reporting, they are still not very efficient. We still have a lot of issues around the quality of the deliverable, the timeliness of the deliverable, and the ability to present a single version of truths. So there is need to then look at the overall core area of finance and improve efficiency and also help the business to reduce costs. And finally, we've also learned from the recent experience on COVID-19 that historical trends are not enough to project the future. There is need for more forward-looking analytics, even for decision making. So stakeholders are then looking on finance leaders to be more forward-looking in terms of how they then provide information to the business. So this is really indeed a wake-up call to finance leaders that the time to act is now, and we cannot really delay the action in terms of adopting technology in the business. There's another area in terms of what technology do we need to then implement even in the finance function. Really, there are some considerations that should be considered. A number of CFOs or finance directors have engaged, have looked at it and suggested that they have an ERP. What else do they need? So really, in determining what technology you need, there are 6 considerations I would just like to talk about. The first one is the business operating model and digital maturity. As a finance person, you cannot be ahead even of the business. So in determining what technology you should implement in finance, you should first of all consider the business operating model and the digital maturity of the business in question. Because if the business is still largely manual and has not leveraged technology as a business, you may not be able to get the benefits, because automation has to be integrated for you to get the value. The second consideration is the cost efficiency, and I emphasize cost efficiency and not cost benefits. Usually when you are implementing technology, there's usually an initial cost that will be associated with implementing technology, but overall is looking at both the cost and the efficiency that will come with implementing the solution in the long run, not in the short term. So that is also a critical area. Another consideration is the productivity and performance of those tools. To say, will this tool be able to achieve whatever I want to achieve? I want to deliver insights. Is this tool able to achieve that performance level? which then speaks to the fourth area is to look at the quality and reliability. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. There are tools that are already tested and trusted in the market. So we should then focus on things that are already reliable, and there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Another fifth consideration is the scalability. So even if we are starting at a low level, we need to be able to look at the tool in terms of it being scalable as the business grows. And finally, the people. Currently, a number of finance leaders have assessed their current team that they may not have the capability to even assess or leverage the digital requirements. So the focus on people is to say, how do we as finance personnel or finance professional build capability within the business, within finance to work on this digital age? So ultimately, what I would say around what technology do finance need is to say finance leaders need to keep abreast of the rapidly changing technology landscape and be aware of what is possible. So once you're aware of what is possible, you can then layer it in terms of what you then need to acquire. The third area that requires clarity, also from my discussion, is how do we then begin? If we know that we need to leverage technology, how do we begin? I think the first step for me is to start with the issue. So we don't necessarily have to know what solution we want to implement or what solution we should be considering. What is really the issue? So is the issue that reporting is delayed? Is the issue that we are not able to provide insights to management? Is the issue that we are not able to support the business and act as a business partner? So that should be the start point to say, what are the issues? It is based on the issues that you then determine the solution and the area for priority. Once that is done, the next thing is then to identify what is your roadmap for automating the finance organization. Typically, there will be a number of issues, and a phased approach is usually the best, such that you don't bring everything at once and then it then becomes unsuccessful. So it is better to consider a phased approach, starting with the high priority areas to the low priority areas. The third area in terms of beginning the journey is to say that for now, a number of finance professionals will agree that the skill sets to embed technology may not necessarily lie in the finance team. So there is the need to select the right partners and providers to assist with the automation journey. So you do not need to invent the wheel. You do not need to recreate where the skills do not exist. So the skills exist, may not necessarily be within finance, but it's to look for those partners and ensure that they are part of the automation journey. The other consideration is around the governance and change management strategy. One of the things that has also made technology fails, and some concerns of a number of CFOs or FDs that I've also discussed with, is around this technology will still not work on its own. You need people. So how do you then manage to ensure the people are able to align with the new norm and ensure the benefits are realized and their automation adoption is effective? So there's need to establish an appropriate governance and change management strategy that will work such that the automation adoption will then be effective. And then finally, I would say that in the past, the way we typically organize finance function is to start with the manning requirements in terms of what people do I need, what are the processes, and then what technology would then enable the process. But what we then need to do differently as we reimagine the finance function is to reorganize our people and processes around technology. So it's to say, what can technology do for me? Based on what technology can do, you will then design new roles, new competencies. You will then re-engineer your processes around what the technology can do. And that, for me, will be the key differentiator as we reimagine the finance function. So in closing, I will just say that digital disruption is not tomorrow's reality. We used to think it was something that will come in the near future, that it's a finance of the future thing, but it appears it's today's norm from what we have seen. So as finance leaders, what is important to us is that we need to be informed. We need to understand what the changing technologies are. We need to understand the technology landscape. We need to also understand the risk associated with this technology. So incorporating or leveraging technology does not mean all the problems will go away. We still have data issues. We will still have glitches and all of that. So we still need to understand the risk of that is associated with technology advancement. And finally, we still also need to develop curiosity of what other finance functions, even in our sector, both locally or globally, are doing, so that we can take advantage of those technology initiatives. The other area I would also like to talk about is around the people. Upskilling. Technology will not work on its own. We still need finance personnel to drive it. There will be new roles. We may begin to have roles of data scientists within the finance function. We may begin to have business partners who are focused on getting external data to provide insights. So it's to relook the finance team skills and see that they are being relevant and reinvented for the reimagined finance function. And I would like to say, lastly, that stakeholders will continue to demand more from finance. So it's beyond what we are currently doing. And to do that is more than an implementation of an ERP, is a holistic infusion of technology in the finance process to ensure that we are able to deliver end-to-end insights to the business. Thank you. So I will take questions after.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bolanle, for the tips. I'm sure the participants have picked one or two lessons from your thoughts. And I think what is important is, given where we are going, even one of the key lessons from the pandemic is that businesses that already have business continuity plans or arrangements in place are the ones that are less impacted than those that didn't have one. And so this is the future. So it's technology. So as you consider automating your core business processes, your production processes, whether you are in manufacturing, you need automation. And we're beginning to see that already. There are a number of businesses, manufacturing factories, that you enter the factory and you only see 3 or 5 people who are just virtually not doing anything, just walking around to ensure that everything, all the automated processes are working perfectly. And that is the future. It enables you, it empowers you to not only run your operations during things like this COVID-19 pandemic, but it's also much cheaper in the long run. However, as we've heard from both Nike and Bolanle, as you automate your core business processes, you need also to automate the tax function. Now, you cannot digitize your tax function in isolation of the finance function, because all the inputs, the information you need to process your tax filing and all the inputs into the tax function, they come from finance. So you cannot do one in isolation. You have to look at all the three. It's a tripod: the core business processes, finance, and tax compliance. I think that's a key lesson from from the party that I've picked up from the panelists. And thank you very much for that. So I have a question. I know that we must have some questions from the presenters, but let me start off with you, IJ. Yes, right now, the pandemic has really caused a lot of disruptions, as you mentioned. But what are your thoughts on how best, or how would you assess the real impact that the pandemic has had on mergers and acquisitions transactions in Nigeria?
Okay, thank you, Mo, and thank you, Bolanle and Nike, for the insights. So from my experience in the market, I would like to approach your question more from 3 perspectives. The first will be the private equity financial investor. The second will be the strategic investors. And then the third will be investments in local projects by various sponsors. So prior to the pandemic, we're working on a few transactions, which expectedly slowed down significantly with the global lockdown. For the private equity financial investors, in view of the nature of the structure of their funds, which for the most part has a fixed defined investment cycle. So from the time of investment to the time of exit, typically for most funds, this spans between 5 to 7 years. We're still seeing a moderate level in deals activities across this category of investors because of their limitation with respect to their timelines. However, for the strategic investors without a similar limitation, we are seeing extended negotiations on both sides, as both sides seek to evaluate the impact the pandemic has had or could potentially have on earnings, which for the most part are the basis of the valuation and agreed price, and more so also on their post-deal transformation strategy and investments. Mindful that for most strategic, when they buy the businesses, they seek to integrate those businesses into their existing businesses. And for the purpose of that integration and to help them assess the long-term strategy and achieve the value that they intended from those acquisitions, they need to make additional investments. So this whole pandemic is just giving them additional time to assess and reassess the implication that it would have on the investments that they intend to have post-deal. However, from a local point of view, we saw a report that is tracked, or we have the report that is tracked by the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission. This report was released recently, and it showed a decline of about 60% between the first half of 2019 and the first half of 2020 with respect to local investment across projects. The first half of 2019 were at 15.15 billion in investments, while currently in this first half of 2020, investment level is at 5.1 billion. For the private equity investors and the strategic investors, a key risk area continues to be the volatility in the Naira. That continues to be a key risk area, and we believe that this risk area will potentially delay investment, as people want to see how the Naira will play out at least in the short term.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much. So, Nika, let me come to you with this question. We spoke a lot about technology and digitization within the tax function. So, what automation and technology tools should companies be deploying, to support their tax compliance process?
Thank you very much, Mohammed, for that question, and thank you all that's also here. And that's a very important question. And I'll start with your summation after the three of us have spoken, and you talked about how is a tripod, and that data is pulled from there's a business and finance and eventually distills into tax. So that shows you that as you automate on the tax, you have to bear in mind that your finance must have been automated and you're pulling data out of those systems. You're not generating new sets of data here. So what is important to you is interrogation tools that can help you determine that the data that came from finance has been properly processed for tax purposes. So for instance, you have your VAT compliance, you have withholding tax compliance. There are various rates for withholding tax, 5% or 10%, depending on the kind of transaction. Question is, as the data you pull from your enterprise resource system, can you have interrogation tools that shows you that the right taxes have been charged on all transactions? That's the single most important tool you need in the tax space, because that gives you a view. You are not waiting until tax audits happen before you know that you have a huge exposure, whether because some failure of your system or the people handling it, and then there are taxes that were not charged. And the interesting thing, especially for the VAT and withholding tax, we call them operational taxes. They are not taxes of the organization. They are those you should have deducted from your customers and vendors. But if you don't do it at the right time and there's an audit, then it becomes the liability of the company. So that is why you need interrogation tools. Examine you have done it properly. And if you have not, you can go back to those customers to either charge or claw back what you should have, costs that you should have passed on to them. The second, maybe more important to then I'll say, is when you have group functions or you have companies that have several branches, the question is, as somebody in tax, head of tax, chief tax officer, whatever tax manager, how do you have a single view of the tax compliance happening in all these different jurisdictions? You need tools that can give you a monitoring view, dashboard, that gives you the status of how compliant each of your different locations are without you having to physically call or people sending you emails and then you trying to match together this data. So that is what we call tax compliance and monitoring tools. In KPMG, for instance, we've developed a whole lot of tools around this entire spectrum that can enable companies based on their size, based on their requirements, to be able to deploy these tools and ensure they can really sleep well at night, knowing that there is no untold tax exposure that can suddenly come up. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for the very detailed response to that question, Nika. So Bolanle, I come to you now. So the question I have for you is, I think the participants would like to know, which areas of the finance function, are more critical and should be automated, and why?
Okay, thank you, Mohammed.
Because within the finance function, you have processes or sub-functions. So which ones are more critical and should be automated, and why?
Okay, thank you, Mohammed, for the question. So just like I mentioned, all the core traditional accounting and reporting tasks can be automated. But in specifically what we should focus on in terms of which ones should be prioritized, they should be tasks that are very time consuming, that involve large volume of data, and are very repetitive. And I'm saying this is that in terms of what you should select as an organization, it may not be one cap fits all. It depends on your business. So there are some businesses that they are very big on customer base. So you have large customers and the invoicing is a very big challenge. So there's lots of data, it's time consuming. So those type of tasks may be priority for that organization. For another organization, it may just be a 1-2 customer type, but they have bank accounts that are running into 5, 10, 20 with high volume of transactions. So it may be the bank reconciliation that then needs to be automated. So what would determine what will be automated is based on the business and looking at the specific task itself. Is it repetitive? Does it take time? Does it involve large volume of data? Will we be able to get maximum benefits when we automate this transaction? And it's cut across every finance core operations. So everything. And the benefit for doing that is once you're able to automate those large volume transactions and repetitive tasks, you are then able to reduce errors. The chances of fraud is also streamlined, and you're able to achieve greater accuracy. And you're able to free up your resources to then spend time on those business insights, which is of more value to the business, rather than acting as finance information administrator, which is where a number of finance functions currently are at this moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Bolanle. Obviously, I think the key thing, the key message from your response is they should focus on automating processes that are repetitive and where they have the highest or very high volume of transactions. And often processes that are that repetitive, high volume, that's where human errors happen. And those are also the ones that are easier to automate. So I think that's the key message, and I'm sure our participants have picked that up. So just a follow-on question, Bolanle. With respect to talking and still speaking about automation and technology, what automation and technology tools should companies be deploying, to support their finance function? I think it's something that our participants will also be interested in your thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Mohammed. Just like I mentioned when I discussed earlier, that in beginning the journey, you start with the issue, not the solution. So there are a lot of solutions that are available, but what organizations will eventually deploy or use will depend on the issues that they have. So we have solutions around automation. So there's RPA, which can layer with artificial intelligence and machine learning capabilities that can help to handle all the high volume, repeatable tasks that we previously used a lot of human beings to perform. So this can then be taken over by robots. So that can be done. It can even be some macros that you write in Excel for highly repetitive tasks. It may also be some functionality that has OCR, that's optical character recognition software. So whereby you get, so if you have large volume of external data or hard copy information coming from external sources. So it can go into a particular location, and then you have a technology that reads the character and then proposes the transaction that can be recorded into your ERP. You also have data and analytics tools that helps to analyze data from different sources. Then you can use that to draw conclusion and give insights. We also have dashboard and data visualization tools as well, like Power BI, which can help to also communicate complex information clearly and present a single view of business data. So there are a number of technologies, and that's why my emphasis at the initial stage is to say we shouldn't start with the solution. Let's start with what the problem is, and then the solution will follow suit. So the finance personnel may not be the appropriate person in terms of understanding what the exact solution will be, but we are better suited to understand what the issues are, and we can partner with the right technology partners or digital experts to identify the right solution that will help to solve the issues that we've noted. And that's the way I would answer that question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that response. So I think at this point, we'll be taking questions from our participants, and I'll call on Moses, the Director General of Fncci, to help us go through this. Moses?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mohammed. And thank you, Ijoma. Thank you, Nike. Thank you, Bolanle, for wonderful presentation. I think our audience have been very engaging. They've been asking questions. One of the questions they have asked is that they want the presentations afterwards. Of course, Ijoma has assured us that you're going to have that, after the event. And so I'm just going to try as much as possible to wrap up their thoughts into some of the things I've picked even before the event. Many of the respondents have asked questions before the event started, while we have a few questions, on board right now, currently. Now, this is what I saw. Now, they said a research that was carried out has it that the first option in reimagining the tax and finance function is rebuilding or transforming the existing tax and finance function. This generally will include building a new digital platform, training on hiring technologists who understand both tax, the new tools, and exploring the creation and expansion of a shared service center. Now, in my opinion, I believe that this is a strategic management imperative. So I'm going to throw that to Ijoma. So I mean that now in trying to reimagine the tax and finance function, does it have to pass through the board? Because you talked about management imperative as far as this is concerned. And number two, Nike, I caught one of your one of the things you said about this tax reimagined in one of the publications that came out. Now I'm going to quote you directly. Nike James said, "With tax reimagined, you are more assured that you are running your business in a very efficient manner. Numbers generated from your tax liabilities are more accurate, and ultimately, your cost of compliance as administration declines." Now, truth, just between the both of us, how efficient is this system in terms of cost management? Because I understand Bolanle has mentioned clearly that most of this tax and finance function should be outsourced. Outsourcing is not cheap, actually. I don't think it's that cheap. So what's your take on that as far as outsourcing is concerned, and the efficiency in reimagination of tax and finance function? So let's grab that first. So Ijoma, Bolanle, and it goes to Nike James also. We'll start from Ijoma, who talked about does this have to be a strategic management imperative in terms of reimagining this tax and finance function?
So yes, so thank you, Moses, for your question. My answer would be a resounding yes, and I'm sure Nike and Bolanle will support my view. And this is really because, finance and tax are very strategic aspects of a business operating model. Remember, we spoke about the operating model to say this is what determines how organizations play, execute, and win in the marketplace. These two functions are very critical to your successful execution and also your ability to achieve your financial outcomes and ambition. So yes, I would say it's a critical imperative. Executives need to pay serious attention to it, ensuring that they have the right investments and taking into considerations all the other areas that Nike and Bolanle have mentioned.
Okay. Okay, so we'll go to Nike James. Nike James, let's have your thoughts, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. And yes, you're quite right. Tax reimagined, you said it can involve some outlay as you outsource, as you invest in technology and what have you. So first, starting with what Ijoma said, she's very accurate about it. When you change your operating model, the management and the board needs to be aware so they can sign off on it as well, so that we know where the money is going and we know what the expected results and changes are. So the question is, it's expensive, but is it cost efficient? And it's a resounding yes. Now, let me give you a little scenario. You know, I talked about having interrogation tools to be sure that maybe the way withholding tax on VAT, on just your invoices have been done well. This is not your tax. You as a company are just an agent of the government to collect it from the vendors and remit to the tax authorities, be it FRS or the state authorities. Do you imagine what some companies pay as back duty liabilities when audits are done on VAT and withholding tax? Many instances, especially for large organizations like banks, they pay billions. Billions, which is not the cost of the bank, but is a failure to have collected the money from your customers. So imagine if you are asked to invest in a tool, an interrogation tool that enables you to actually determine ab initio if you have done the task right, or to outsource to a low-cost service provider to enable you do it. How much could you possibly pay vis-a-vis the kind of tax costs and liabilities that emerge from doing the wrong thing? So when you begin to look at it from that perspective, you realize that it is extremely cost effective. And when people draw down the numbers and really analyze, you realize it's the way to go. We recognize that in the short time, sometimes people have cash flow issues, and it's actual about in terms of being able to have the outlay to do this. And that's why you plan. And that is why it's part of things you give to your board to approve, and you set out an investment towards going on this journey, knowing that in the medium to long term, it will more than pay itself off. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Of course, you have made it clear to us that it is not cheap, but in the long term, medium to long term, it is also very, very cheap. So I'll go to the points I raised towards outsourcing. Someone said something. Solomon OEM said something. I think he is asking a question. Is it possible to fully outsource the finance function of an organization? Of course, we have organizations with their own internal policies. And, you know, is it possible? How sensitive is this area in terms of outsourcing tax and finance function? Bolanle, please help us that.
Okay, thank you very much. And my answer is yes. So currently in Kpmg, we even have an accounting advisory unit, which we focus on outsourcing. I would say there is a bit of limitation. So what we'll do, so you can outsource all your core accounting and reporting functions, in terms of the bookkeeping, reporting, management reporting, and even providing insights to management. Some areas that may pose some challenge is the management decision area, in terms of how you then use the insights in making business decisions. But in terms of whether the core finance areas can be outsourced, that is very, is a high yes. It can be outsourced fully, but the insights that then comes out from the outputs then becomes management decision, which may not necessarily be outsourced.
Okay, thank you very, very much for that answer. Peculiar Abbas is asking a question. She said, might there be policies in place going forward to encourage businesses to embrace digital solutions for payroll processes and tax payments? I think that has been answered already, of course. Yeah, so what do you think? Maybe you can stress the answer again.
Thank you very much. Yes, in terms of policies, first, maybe I should emphasize this is not a regulated environment. You are not mandated by any rules or tax laws or requirements to outsource. It's a business decision, and it comes down to the heart of what kind of business and operating model do you want to operate. So if you decide based on those goals, like I said, for reimagining your tax function, which are 4 in number. One is you want to reduce cost, you want to increase value, you want to improve efficiency, and you want to enhance quality. If you find out that you can deliver those 4, then the right thing to do is to outsource it. So if you consider your payroll function based on whether the diversity, the cost outlay, the resources it takes, you can find it cheaper to do elsewhere. But if you have a very lean payroll structure, maybe it's just part of one of the work some other person is doing, there might not be tax advantage to outsourcing it. So again, you have to analyze your own situation and determine what delivers value to the business. It's not a one cap fits all. So that's why you have to go through some thinking and actually determining the value proposition from outsourcing. But from my experience, for many large organizations, there's a lot of cost leakages. So outsourcing of a lot of the routine, especially most of the repetitive routine processes, it actually pays organizations to outsource them in the long run. That's our experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So we have another question. I think this question is for Ijoma. It said, do you by chance have a data for how companies in Nigeria are adapting to the new normal in terms of go-to-market strategies?
So my answer for now would be no, because we haven't done that research internally and locally. The research that I shared, which you can also share copies with the participant, Moses, is research that we have done on a global level on how consumers' behavior will change post-pandemic. And that research we can share with everyone.
Okay, thank you very much. So before the event started, we had David, which is from CDAP Nigeria. He said he would love to know about the role of digitization and taxation in domestic revenue generation, mobilization, collection, and assurance. I think Nike has mentioned that. You can just stress that again for us, please.
So thank you. Digitization is the way to the future for the tax authorities, and it's for a number of reasons. The same reason why you have to reimagine your tax function. For a lot of tax authorities, and I use the Nigerian tax authorities, FRS, the state authorities, for instance, they have a limited number of people. Do you realize that even to do tax audits of companies, they are normally many years in arrears? Your tax records of 2019 may not get audited by the FRS until 3 or 4 years' time. Why? Because they're still battling with the audits of prior years. That is what the limitation in human resources do. And that is why going the digital way is to ask for your digital records. They would use their own software to interrogate those records, and it's the exceptions that humans would then have to deal with. So it's good to revolutionize the way we do tax tax compliance and filing. And we imagine that in the next couple of years, like I said, probably within the next 1 to 3 years, we would have fully landed on that platform. On stamp duties, FRS is already rolling it out. They want to actually do an electronic review of the electronic transactions. So they are not asking you to do a printout of all those transactions that they would have manually reviewed like they would have done in the past. They will have their own softwares through APIs, interrogating your own enterprise resource softwares to pull out data. So the future is actually here, and that is why companies cannot rest on their oars. They need to embrace digitization now, otherwise they'll find themselves exposed. The last thing you want is the tax authority interrogating your data, finding so many huge holes, and then the liability crystallizes and you have no chance to claw back from your customers because it has crystallized. The essence of you doing proactive review is to be able to address it before the authorities do what? Review your records. So the time for that is getting shorter. So you also need to jump on the digitization platform and ensure that you are compliant as well. I hope that addresses the issue.
Yes, of course it does. Of course it does. I believe it does. Thank you very much, Nike. So I will be taking final words from all speakers, and I'll start from Ijoma. Just in less than a minute, just give us your final words as we wrap up today's session. So Ijoma, please.
So thank you, Moses, and thank you for the time and thank you for the insightful discussions. I would defer to Nike and Bolanle's detailed presentation and specific course of action. With respect to the business and operating model, we will encourage executives to really look into their business and operating models in the context of my presentation and evaluate the current state vis-a-vis what they expect to see that would help them cope and achieve their ambitions post-pandemic. And just to assess and reassess and emphasize that Kpmg is available based on our experience working with other clients and based on our understanding of the industry and our global research team, we are available to help clients navigate these challenges post-pandemic. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, Nike, please.
Okay. I think what I can say is that tax costs is a key component of your entire value proposition in an organization, because effectively, out of every 1 naira you make as profit, you pay 30% of that as your tax. and that is your own tax as an organization. They now have those taxes which you are an agent of the government and responsible for collection from vendors and then remitting. So when there are wrongdoings over there and you add together the aggregate of all these costs, sometimes more than 50% of your profitability is going towards what? Outlaying and settling tax costs. So the question is, with the pandemic and what has happened and the heavy beating our revenue lines have actually taken, we can't but have to reimagine our tax functions. And the time to do that is not in the future, it is now. Reimagine your tax function is not about throwing money and spending money. It is really about you saving yourself in terms of the larger exposures that you can have in the future. So I hope people will embrace that. I hope they will be willing to have further conversation. They should talk to the right consultants. They should talk to people who can actually enable, can take them on this transformational journey that ensures that post-pandemic, they emerge as stronger, bigger, and well-positioned organizations to survive into the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Bolanle, can we have it?
Okay, thank you very much. I would just like to conclude by saying 4 key things. That disruption is part of our lives. Even if we go over this particular one, another one would come. And as finance functions, the stakeholders will continue to look up to us to provide more business insights beyond what we are currently doing. And for us to be able to do that, we will need to adopt technology so that we can free up our time and resources to provide this value-adding business partnering and predictive analytics to stakeholders. And finally, I would say that upskilling will be necessary to be relevant in the new reimagined finance function. Based on our current skills, it may not be enough. We will then need to upskill to ensure that we are able to function well in the reimagined finance function. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. So, Mr. Mohammed, do you have 1 or 2 things to say before I wrap up?
Okay, I think they've summarized it all. I think the key thing is, digitization, automation is the future, and that future is here and now. Somebody says, if you survive the pandemic, if by the end of December 2020, if you, as a person, you are alive, then you are already a winner. And if you are a business, you are still in operation by the end of December 2020, that you've already made a profit. It's just that it's not monetary. And I think post-pandemic, digitization is here. And I think we need to embrace it, and the time to do that is now. Thank you. So I leave it for you to do the closing.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Mohammed. Thank you very much, Ijoma. Thank you for your insights. I'll leave all of us with this insight by Kpmg. He said that tax is often the greatest single expense for many companies. Yet it often remains largely an afterthought in the strategic planning process. Modernizing tax operations and closely aligning the tax and finance functions across people, process, and technology can turn real-time tax decision-making from a vision into a reality. I think that summarizes what Ijoma, what Nika James has said, what Bolanle has said, and of course, what Mr. Mohammed has said. So once again, thank you very much for joining us today. Once again, we thank Kpmg for partnering with us, Sholep Energy Limited for being part of this great event. The Chamber of Commerce, like I said before, remains your partner in doling out information in collaboration with brands like we have in front of you here today. And of course, we cannot wait to have physical breakfast meetings again. So we are targeting the French week in November to be able to achieve that. But going forward, we'll still be having our business webinars. The next one we're looking out for would be cyber security in times like this, because of course the work from home reality, and of course hacking and your firewall and all of that. These are things we need to talk about, so we can protect businesses. It's not just about working from home. Ensure you're protected wherever you are. So once again, I want to thank Ijoma Ezigbo, which is the partner deal advisor at Kpmg, for doling out great information as far as strategic imperatives and investing post-COVID-19 is concerned. Thank you very much, Ijoma. Thank you very much, Nika James. Of course, I've already seen your article even before now on this reimagination of the tax process for organizations. And she is a partner, financial service and institutions, tax and regulatory and people service at Kpmg. Thank you very much for doling out insights on reimagining the tax function. Thank you very much, Bolanle, who is the Associate Director, Internal Audit and Risk Compliance Service over at Kpmg too. And of course, thank you very much, Mohammed Adama, for being our great moderator today, who is the partner, consumer markets over at KPMG. And most especially, we want to thank all our audience for joining us today, those that joined us live, and of course, the recording will still be available for those that will join us later. So on behalf of the Board of Directors of the Franco-Nigerian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, we put this event to a close. Merci beaucoup et à bientôt. Merci.